Hey guys, tonight we are plunging into one of the oldest, darkest corners of human imagination, the Greek Underworld. You're about to take the slow walk down into Hades, and, just to be clear, you probably won't survive this in any meaningful sense. That's the whole point. Mortals enter, shades drift forever, and you? Well, you'll be tagging along in spirit. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure. I'm curious though, what city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? I love picturing all of you tuning in from different corners of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The descent begins with a narrowing of the path. You notice how the air changes, colder, damper, as though the ground itself is exhaling centuries of forgotten sighs. The Greeks imagined this threshold as the literal border between life and death, but also as something more symbolic, the final acceptance that there's no going back. The Romans later painted the scene with even darker hues, but tonight you're sticking with the Greeks. Each step feels heavier, as if you're dragging not just your feet but all the unfinished business you've been putting off. Welcome to the ambience of eternity, half boredom, half dread. What's interesting is that historically Greeks didn't obsess over the afterlife the way, say, medieval Christians did. The afterworld wasn't exactly terrifying, it was just inevitable. Homer in the Odyssey describes the shades of the dead as thin, drifting, almost pitiable figures. They are not suffering dramatically, they are just existing in a grey zone, a cosmic waiting room with no magazines. And here's the quirky fact for you. In some traditions, the entrance to the underworld wasn't deep underground at all. Some said it was located in real physical spots, caves near Cape Tanarum in southern Greece, or even Lake Avernus in Italy, which bubbled with volcanic fumes. Imagine walking past such a place on your way home from the market thinking, ah yes, that's where souls slip out of this world. Cozy. But scholars debate something more subtle. Did ordinary Greeks actually believe in a literal Hades, or was it more of a poetic metaphor? The text suggests both. On one hand, funerary rites often included coins for Charon, the Ferryman, which seems pretty practical if you're worried about your post-mortem commute. On the other hand, philosophers like Epicurus shrugged the whole thing off, saying death was just the end. No ferries, no shadows, just oblivion. The tension between those two views, mythic afterlife versus no afterlife at all, runs like a thin crack under every stone in this path you're walking. As you move farther along, the soundscape shifts. First it's silence, then the faint rush of unseen water. The ancients described 5 rivers marking the terrain down here: Styx, Acheron, Lethe, Phlegethon, Cocytus. But right now you only hear one, the Acheron, the River of Woe. The name itself feels heavy, like it doesn't want to be spoken to often. You'll be crossing it soon enough, but for now, the rumbling water just sets the mood. Picture mist rising, cool drops clinging to your arms. Is the kind of place where you instinctively whisper, even though no one's around to scold you. Let's pause on a small oddity. Ancient pilgrims sometimes left offerings at supposed entrances to Hades. Not just the usual coins or libations of wine, sometimes food scraps, tiny trinkets, or even curses scratched into lead tablets. Yes, curses. People would write down nasty little spells, fold the lead sheets, and chuck them into the ground, hoping the spirits below would deliver their grievances like an underworld postal service. Makes you wonder if Hades himself got sick of being everyone's cosmic complaint box. The debate among scholars here is whether those rituals were more about controlling fate or just about venting human frustration. Were people truly convinced their enemies would be struck down because of a lead tablet tossed into a cave? Or was it more symbolic, a way of saying, I've done what I can, the rest is out of my hands? No one really knows, but the archaeological evidence suggests this underworld mailbox was stuffed for centuries. So much for letting it go. By now your path is sloping downward, and the darkness has grown thicker. If you squint, you see faint lantern light bobbing ahead. Maybe another traveller? Maybe just your imagination filling the void? The Greeks liked to imagine souls travelling in droves, not alone, and that makes sense. Dying is terrifying enough. Doing it solo would be unbearable. The mass of humanity drifting together into the shadows, that's the quieter horror of Hades. You might expect the atmosphere to be screaming horror movie doom, but it's not. The underworld isn't about torment, unless you're one of the unlucky special cases, but we'll get to those later. For most, it's about monotony, eternal sameness. Think of the most boring waiting line at the DMV, except you're translucent, you don't need snacks, and you've lost the ability to complain out loud. Somehow that's scarier than hellfire. You pause for a breath, not because you need air down here, but because your human instincts still demand it. The shadows don't clear, but you realise the weight of the place is more than physical. It's a kind of memory, thousands of years of human fear and ritual carved into myth. Hades isn't just one god's kingdom, it's the warehouse of everything people ever worried about when they thought of what comes next. And you, lucky traveller, are now walking through its foyer. The light ahead resolves into a shape, not a lantern, but the glimmer of a crown, faint as if made from shadow itself. This is Hades, the so-called Silent King. You expect the god of death to be terrifying, skeletal, maybe waving around a scythe. Instead, he's just quiet, solid, a little aloof, like the guy in the corner of a party who doesn't want to be there but can't leave. Unlike his flashier siblings, Zeus with thunderbolts, Poseidon with oceans, Hades rules a realm that no one volunteers to visit. It's not glamorous, it's not fun, and it doesn't even smell good. Still, he wears the crown. Historically, Hades wasn't worshipped the same way other Olympians were. The Greeks didn't exactly throw him festivals with garlands and music. He was too ominous for that. Most prayers to him were whispered, often euphemistic, as if people didn't even want to say his name too loudly. Sometimes they called him Pluton, meaning the wealthy one, because technically he owned all the riches buried underground, metals, gems, fertile soil. That little rebrand was probably the first case of ancient PR spin. Death god too creepy? Just call him Mr. Prosperity. Here's your quirky fact. Hades owned a cap of invisibility, one of the weirder divine accessories. It was forged by the Cyclopes and handed down as a gift during the Titanomachy, the great war of gods and titans. Unlike Zeus's thunderbolt or Poseidon's trident, Hades never really used the cap for fighting. Instead, it was more like his avoid human interaction hat. He loaned it out to heroes on quests. Perseus used it when sneaking past Medusa's sisters, for example. So yes, even gods have that one item in their closet they don't wear much but keep around just in case. But scholars debate a surprisingly tender angle. Was Hades actually cruel? The myths don't really show him torturing anyone. Punishments in the underworld, like Sisyphus rolling his boulder, weren't delivered by Hades himself. He was more administrator than villain, more warden than sadist. Think of him as the CEO of eternity, filing souls into their proper categories. Some historians even argue he was one of the fairest gods, never bending rules, never bribed, never throwing lightning tantrums like Zeus. Fair, but absolutely not fun at parties. As you stand there, you notice how still he is. No booming proclamations, no dramatic speeches, just presence. The Greeks believed that even saying his name could invite attention, so his silence is part intimidation, part inevitability. You can't negotiate with someone who doesn't talk back. His court isn't filled with laughter or feasting. Instead, there's an endless hush, the kind of silence that gets under your skin until you hear your own heartbeat louder than anything else. And yet, he's not entirely heartless. This is the god who loved Persephone, not in a Disney villain kind of way, but in a mythic, tragic, arranged marriage by abduction sort of way. The details we'll get to later, but the point is, Hades wasn't incapable of attachment. He ruled with a partner. That's more than you can say for Zeus, who collected lovers like Pokemon but never stuck around. Hades, once Persephone came, actually had a queen at his side for eternity. Strange romance, but romance nonetheless. You catch a flicker of expression on his face, as if he's aware you're staring too long. And maybe you are. Mortals aren't supposed to gawk at gods. The shadows ripple around him, forming what looks like pillars, maybe even a throne carved from obsidian. The throne isn't grand, no gold leaf, no silk cushions, just heavy dark stone. Perfectly functional, perfectly eternal, the kind of chair you don't sit in unless you're ready to never get up again. Here's another odd little note. Some cults treated Hades with surprising reverence, especially those linked to agriculture, because what happens when seeds are planted? They die underground, only to sprout later. Farmers saw in that cycle a mirror of human death and rebirth. Hades wasn't just the end, he was part of the recycling system of life. Without him, no crops, no harvest, no food, which, if you think about it, is probably the nicest compliment death has ever received. But the debate rages even here. Was Hades truly one of the Olympians? He's counted as one of the big three brothers, but he never lived on Mount Olympus. He stayed in his subterranean office while Zeus and Poseidon hogged the spotlight. Some ancient lists include him as an Olympian, others politely leave him off, like that cousin no one invites to family reunions, and honestly, Hades probably preferred it that way, less small talk. You take a step closer but the shadows thicken. Maybe he doesn't want you near. Maybe he's reminding you that mortals shouldn't get too cozy with death, even in imagination. Still, you've met him now, you've seen the king, in his quiet, heavy stillness, more inevitable than frightening. He doesn't chase you, he doesn't charm you, he just exists. And somehow that's scarier than if he had pulled out a sword. You can fight a warrior. You can't fight inevitability. You bow your head, instinctively respectful. Whether he notices or not, you'll never know. Hades doesn't blink, doesn't smile. He just continues being what he has always been. The unmoving centre of a realm where nothing ever changes and no one ever leaves. You leave the throne behind, but his presence clings to you like the smell of smoke on a jacket. Ahead, the shadows lighten. Not much, but enough to reveal a second figure. Persephone, the queen who splits her calendar between sunlight and shadow. If Hades is inevitability, she's contradiction. One half of the year, she's up above, bringing spring blooms and grain harvest to the world of the living. The other half, she's here, seated quietly beside the silent king, adding a fragile grace to the gloom. Her story is one of the most famous in Greek mythology, though the details twist depending on who's telling it. The broad strokes. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, was picking flowers one day when the ground opened beneath her. Hades rose up in his chariot and whisked her away. Romantic? Not really. Traumatic? Absolutely. This myth wasn't designed to soothe modern sensibilities. It was meant to explain why the earth goes barren for part of the year. Demeter, goddess of grain and agriculture, mourned her daughter's disappearance so intensely that crops refused to grow. The world suffered famine until Zeus stepped in, brokering a deal. Persephone would spend part of the year above ground, part below. Thus, seasons. Here's your quirky fact. Some versions say Persephone was tricked into staying in the underworld because she ate a few pomegranate seeds. Depending on the author, it's 4 seeds, 6 seeds, sometimes even just 1. The symbolism is deliciously literal. Eat food in the land of the dead and you become part of it. It's a mythic version of no free samples. Once you snack, you're stuck. Scholars, of course, argue endlessly about what this myth really means. Was it purely an agricultural allegory, a way to explain the crop cycles? Or was it more about marriage customs in ancient Greece, where young women were often taken from their families and married off? Some feminist readings point out that Persephone isn't just a victim, she becomes a queen, wielding power in the underworld beside Hades. Others emphasize the abduction as a cautionary tale, showing how little agency women had in the patriarchal system. And then there's the cultic angle. Persephone played a central role in the Eleusinian mysteries, secret rituals that promised initiates a gentler afterlife. To them, she wasn't just a tragic daughter, she was a guide through death's darkness. You watch her move, slow, deliberate, every gesture radiating calm. She doesn't need to shout to command respect. Unlike Hades, she seems aware of her visitors. Her gaze meets yours, and for a second you forget this is supposed to be terrifying. She carries springtime in her eyes, but winter clings to her hem. Being both things at once must get exhausting. Imagine shuttling between brunch dates in sunny Athens and eternity shifts in shadowy Hades. Honestly, the commute alone would ruin anyone's mood. And yet, Persephone adapts. The Greeks believed she presided over the mysteries because she embodied transformation, the journey from death to rebirth, sorrow to renewal. Her role complicates the idea of the underworld as just bleak nothingness. Yes, it's quiet and grey, but through Persephone, it also becomes the soil of potential, the hidden root system of all life above. Without her return, no harvest. Without her absence, no seasons. Even boredom down here has consequences for the living. There's a small, odd tradition worth noting. Some ancient wedding songs invoked Persephone by name. Imagine starting your marriage with a reference to the goddess who got dragged underground by her new husband. Sweet, right? But for the Greeks, marriage itself was a kind of symbolic death, a woman leaving her family forever, entering another household. Persephone's story mirrored that social reality, making her both terrifying and relatable. But the debate that still stirs is whether Persephone herself wanted any of this. Was she truly a victim trapped in a marriage against her will, or did she eventually embrace her role as queen? Later poets sometimes depict her as a willing partner, sitting proudly beside Hades, handing out judgments. Earlier versions keep her more passive, a daughter yearning for her mother. Which is true. We'll never know. She keeps her secrets, just like her realm. As you watch her glide across the obsidian floor, the air shifts again. It's softer than when you stood near Hades. The silence feels less oppressive, more like a pause before a new season. Persephone nods once, as if acknowledging your presence, then turns away. You sense it's not rejection, just inevitability. Her attention is divided between worlds. Soon enough she'll leave this place again, and for a few months flowers will bloom, bees will swarm, and life will feel endless. Then inevitably she'll return, and so will the shadows. You realise that Persephone's myth isn't about choosing one world or the other. It's about the rhythm of moving between them. Light, dark, life, death, bloom, wither. Maybe that's why she feels both so distant and so familiar. You've been through your own cycles, your own ups and downs. Hers are just myth-sized. For now, she remains here, balancing the stillness of Hades with the whisper of life she carries in her. Without her, this place would feel like a prison. With her, it feels, if not hopeful, at least tolerable. And maybe that's the best the underworld ever offers. The path winds downward again, and now the sound of running water grows clearer, echoing off unseen stone walls. You're about to encounter one of the most famous features of this realm, the rivers of the dead. Forget clear mountain streams or babbling brooks, these waters are moody, each one carrying its own flavour of misery. The Greeks didn't settle for just one river. Oh no, they needed 5, each with its own job description. Apparently, even in death, bureaucracy reigned supreme. The first river you encounter is the Styx, the big one, the celebrity of the underworld. Its name literally means hatred, or abhorrence, which already sets the tone. Gods themselves swore oaths on its waters, because if you lied while invoking the Styx, the punishment was a year in a death-like coma, followed by 9 more years of exile from Olympus. Imagine telling a fib and then being benched for a decade. The Styx isn't just a border river, it's cosmic truth serum. You don't splash around in it unless you're serious. Here's the quirky tidbit. Achilles, the famous warrior, was dipped in the Styx as a baby to make him invulnerable. His mother, Thetis, held him by the heel, leaving that one vulnerable spot, hence Achilles' heel. But let's be honest, if you're dunking your infant into the toxic river of hatred, maybe double check your grip. Parenting, but make it hazardous. The second river is Acheron, the river of woe. This one gets a lot of stage time in myths, because it's usually described as the first real boundary you cross on the way into the underworld. Charon the Ferryman rows his passengers across it, their coins clinking faintly in his pouch. The Acheron's waters are described as black and oily, not something you'd ever mistake for a refreshing drink. Oddly enough, there's a real river in northwestern Greece called Acheron, where people in antiquity pointed and said, "Yep, that's the one. Gateway to Hades, right there." Imagine having a picnic nearby. Next comes the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Souls who drank from it lost all memory of their past lives. This was a requirement before reincarnation. You couldn't carry your baggage into the next round. Some later traditions, though, let initiates in mystery cults drink from a different spring, Monotony, so they remembered instead. That's the scholarly debate here. Was forgetting considered a blessing, or was remembering the true path to freedom? Different cults had radically different answers, and no one left Yelp reviews to clear it up. Then there's the Phlegethon, the fiery river. Unlike the gloomy Styx or forgetful Lethe, this one blazes with flames, flowing like molten lava through the underworld. Plato describes it circling the realm in a fiery embrace, which sounds poetic until you realise it's basically an eternal volcano moat. Some later writers connected it with Tartarus, where the truly wicked were punished. If you thought rivers couldn't be extra, the Phlegethon begs to differ. Last comes Cocytus, the river of lamentation. Its waters are described as cold, stagnant, and eternally weeping. Souls along its banks are stuck crying forever, which feels redundant. What else are you supposed to do in the underworld? Still, it makes sense to have a river whose whole vibe is sobbing. If the Styx is anger and the Lethe is forgetfulness, then Cocytus is raw grief, the soundtrack of eternity. You stand at a bend where several of these rivers seem to overlap. Of course, geography and myth doesn't follow normal rules. They can all meet, all circle, all separate, depending on who's telling the story. Think of it like a subway map drawn by 5 different cartographers who never compared notes. The rivers shift, their currents humming with meanings heavier than water. An odd fact that always amuses scholars. Some ancient commentators tried to reconcile these mythical rivers with real-world geography. They pointed to swamps, volcanic lakes, or sulphurous springs as proof that the underworld rivers had physical counterparts. Lake Avernus in Italy, for example, gave off suffocating fumes, so naturally locals assumed it was Cocytus or Acheron. Because, of course, if a pond smells bad, it must be where souls weep forever. Logical. But debates continue. Were these rivers metaphors, rituals, or literal beliefs? Did Greeks think their dead relatives were actually floating down Cocytus? Or was it more a poetic way to describe grief itself? The Homeric texts lean toward metaphor, while mystery cult inscriptions suggest people really did expect to drink from Lethe or Mnemosyne after death. In short, the rivers were whatever people needed them to be. Cosmic landmarks, poetic devices, or spiritual maps. As you stand there listening to the overlapping murmurs, some fiery, some weeping, some rushing, you realise these waters aren't about hydrology. They're about emotions. Anger, grief, forgetfulness, barrow, fire. The Greeks poured all the messy human feelings into liquid form and let them carve the landscape of eternity. It's strangely comforting, like they were saying, hey, all the stuff you're feeling right now, don't worry, we bottled it up down here too. The rivers hum behind you as you approach a crooked dock jutting out into the mist. A boat drifts there, its wood swollen and cracked from centuries of damp, its shape more suggestion than structure. And waiting on it, hunched and impatient, is Charon the Ferryman. If Hades is the quiet CEO and Persephone is the seasonal co-ruler, then Charon is the underpaid, overworked employee who keeps the whole system moving. His job is simple: ferry souls across the river, one coin at a time. In myth, Charon is described as grim, dirty, and perpetually sour. Not a people person, though, to be fair. His customers aren't exactly lively conversationalists. He doesn't wear golden robes or flash divine accessories. He's got a pole, a boat, and the eternal annoyance of dealing with unprepared souls. Forget your coin, no crossing. You're left to wander the banks, drifting endlessly without direction. Practical lesson: always check your pockets before dying. Historically, this detail gave rise to one of the most consistent burial customs in ancient Greece, placing a coin, often an obol or a danake, in the mouth or on the eyes of the deceased. Archaeologists have found graves across the Mediterranean with such coins, tucked neatly as if the family was making sure their loved one wouldn't get stranded in the afterlife's version of a toll booth. Oddly enough, not everyone could afford it. The poor sometimes went without, suggesting they either relied on Charon's mercy or resigned themselves to ghostly wandering. Here's the quirky fact. In some regions, instead of a coin, families has placed a tiny terracotta token or even a simple pebble with the body. The theory is that if Charon was picky, he might still accept it as payment, or maybe the symbolic gesture was enough. Imagine showing up to eternity's most infamous ferryman with a rock and saying, "Trust me, it's currency where I come from." Scholars debate whether Charon was always part of Greek myth. He doesn't appear in Homer's early descriptions of the underworld. Instead, shades just drift there without needing a boat ride. Charon seems to have been borrowed later, possibly from Etruscan or Egyptian traditions, where psychopomps, guides of souls, were common. By the classical period, though, Charon had become standard issue in the Greek imagination, a permanent fixture with his boat and his grumpy scowl. You approach him now, and he eyes you suspiciously. His gaze isn't fiery or divine, just tired, like he's seen every kind of soul and none of them impress him anymore. He extends a hand, bony, callous, demanding, and you feel the phantom weight of a coin in your palm. Whether you really have one or not doesn't matter. Myth ensures you do. You hand it over, and his fingers close around it with mechanical precision. No thanks, no ceremony, just transaction. The boat rocks as you step inside. The water beneath isn't quite liquid. It shimmers, more shadow than substance, and the pole Charon uses to push the boat forward makes no splash. You sit in silence because talking seems pointless. What would you even say? Nice night for a crossing. He's heard it all. Oddly enough, some later depictions soften Charon. In certain Roman and Byzantine sources, he's shown almost kindly, a necessary companion rather than a menace. But the majority keep him as irritable and joyless, the eternal boatman who will never reach retirement. Scholars wonder if he's supposed to represent the inevitability of paying for passage, death as transaction, a system no one can escape. After all, in life you pay taxes, in death you pay Charon. Same principle, different currency. As the boat drifts, you notice shapes in the water, faces, maybe pressing up from beneath like drowned memories. They open their mouths as if to speak, but the current drags them under again. Charon doesn't react. This is normal for him. To you it's unnerving, like walking past portraits that try to whisper secrets. You look away, focusing instead on the horizon, where a faint glow marks the far shore. The silence stretches on, broken only by the scrape of the pole against invisible depths. And yet this silence isn't quite empty. It's charged with all the crossings that came before you, millions of souls ferried across, each one paying their coin, each one thinking their death was unique. Charon knows better. To him it's all the same. Another passenger, another crossing, another eternity. Finally, the boat grinds against stone. You step off onto the opposite bank, the mist curling around your legs. Behind you, Charon already turns the boat, already reaching out for the next payment. No goodbye, no farewell, just work, always work, and in a strange way that's comforting. Even in death, someone still shows up to do their job. Your feet crunch against the damp stone as the mist clears, just enough to reveal something more solid. A towering gate. This isn't the polite, ivy-covered garden kind of gate. It's iron, twisted and blackened, fused together in shapes that look suspiciously like bones. Standing before it, you can almost hear the groan of hinges that haven't been oiled since the dawn of time. The gate marks the official entrance to the underworld proper, and like any good mythological entrance, it comes with a guard dog, not a regular guard dog, not even one of those enormous mastiffs that drool over their owner's shoes. No, this is Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades. You spot him right away, massive, hunched, and very much awake. Three heads swivel independently, each set of eyes glowing with a faint yellow sheen. One head sniffs the ground, catching the scent of every visitor. Another glares forward, daring anyone to make eye contact. The third just pants noisily, drool hanging in strings like translucent icicles. If you're a mortal showing up without a good excuse, Cerberus is the last thing you want to see. But tonight, you're here under the narrative's protection, so let's assume you're safe. Probably. Historically, Cerberus shows up in nearly every myth involving entry into Hades. Homer mentions him briefly, Hesiod gives him 50 heads, yes, 50, apparently someone overestimated, and later writers settled on the more manageable 3. Artists loved to depict him on vases, usually leashed by Heracles or sitting dutifully beside Hades' throne. Despite his fearsome reputation, he wasn't so much violent as immovable. His job wasn't to hunt down escapees, but to make sure no one left once they'd entered. Cerberus is less attack dog, more eternal bouncer. Here's your quirky fact. In some fringe versions, Cerberus's tail isn't a normal tail but a serpent, flicking and striking like a venomous whip. And to add to the nightmare fuel, snakes are said to sprout from his back as well. Picture that, 3 dog heads barking at you while a tail snake hisses insults. It's like a heavy metal album cover brought to life. Scholars debate what Cerberus really represents. Is he simply mythological security, the locked gate personified in canine form? Or is he a symbolic boundary, embodying the fear of leaving death behind? Some psychoanalytic takes suggest he represents the anxiety of no return, the mental watchdog that prevents humans from dwelling too much on escape fantasies. Others argue he's just there because Greeks, like everyone else, knew dogs are scary when they're oversized and drooling. Myth doesn't always have to be that deep. As you edge closer, you notice that Cerberus doesn't lunge. He just watches, head shifting, jaws occasionally snapping at unseen flies. His growl vibrates through the stone beneath your shoes, yet there's a weird sort of loyalty in him. Unlike most monsters of Greek myth, Cerberus isn't trying to overthrow gods or harass mortals. He's doing his job night after night, year after year, with terrifying consistency. You almost want to pat him on the head, though you'd have to choose carefully which head you went for. Stories about sneaking past Cerberus always carry a flair of ingenuity. Orpheus lulled him to sleep with music. Heracles wrestled him into submission as one of his 12 labours, and Aeneas, in Roman myth, fed him drugged honey cakes. Apparently even monstrous hellhounds can't resist a sweet snack. Imagine being the guardian of death itself and still falling for cookies with a little something extra. Relatable. But the scholarly debate about Heracles Labor brings up an interesting point. Was Cerberus actually defeated, or just borrowed? Some texts say Heracles dragged him up to the surface, terrifying the living world with his presence, then dutifully returned him. Others imply Hades allowed the capture as a test of strength rather than a true conquest. The point is, even the strongest mortal hero didn't kill Cerberus. You don't kill inevitability, you endure it, distract it, or temporarily negotiate with it, but it always comes back. Standing before the gate, you realise that Cerberus isn't just frightening because of his size or his teeth. He's frightening because he makes the boundary real. Before him, you could pretend this was just a stroll through gloomy scenery. Now, it's official. Once you cross these gates, you're in, and leaving, that's no longer your decision. The gates creak open, though you never see who or what pushes them. The sound alone is enough to make your chest tighten. Cerberus shifts, his three heads lowering in unison as you pass. Not an attack, not even permission, just acknowledgement. You've been seen, you've been counted, and in the underworld being noticed by its guardian means you've officially arrived. Behind you, the iron shuts with a slam that rattles through your bones. Ahead, the underworld stretches out in endless twilight. Cerberus lies back down by the gate, waiting for the next soul, his job eternal, his vigilance unbroken. You walk forward, but part of you knows you'll never stop hearing the sound of those three heads breathing in sync, a reminder that no matter how far you wander, the way out is already closed. The clang of the gates fades behind you. But the silence doesn't last long. Ahead, a hall comes into focus, vast, echoing, its walls lined with torches that don't flicker so much as smoulder. The light is dim enough to keep everything shadowy, yet just bright enough to reveal three figures seated at the far end, waiting. These are the judges of fate, Rhadamanthus, Minos, and Aeacus. If Hades is the king, these three are the bureaucrats, sorting every soul that stumbles through the heads. You might expect robes and scrolls, maybe some kind of divine clipboard, but the atmosphere here feels more courtroom than Olympus. Rhadamanthus, the strictest of the three, was once a mortal king of Crete, celebrated for his fairness. Legends say he was so just in life that the gods promoted him to judge in death, which is either the ultimate compliment or the ultimate punishment. Imagine retiring from kingship only to be told, "Congrats, now you'll be reviewing cases forever." Minos, also from Crete, sits in the middle. He's often depicted as the head judge, casting the final vote when the other two disagree. Aeacus, the quietest, hailed from Aegina, and was known for piety so intense that Zeus himself trusted him with Olympus's keys. Together, they're the ultimate underworld tribunal, deciding where each shade will spend eternity. Here's the quirky fact: some sources describe Aeacus as in charge of the keys to the underworld gates themselves. Imagine showing up at death's door and realizing your eternal placement depends on a man who, in life, was best known for island management. It's like having your afterlife decided by the world's strictest HOA president. The scholarly debate here is fascinating. Were these three actually consistent across myths, or did their roles shift depending on the author's cultural agenda? Homer doesn't even mention them. In his version, the afterlife is more or less the same for everyone. But later writers like Plato use the judges to introduce moral sorting, foreshadowing ideas of heaven and hell. Some argue this shift reflects evolving Greek views on justice, that maybe life wasn't just random suffering, but there was a cosmic reckoning after death. Others push back, noting that ordinary Greeks still didn't expect much beyond the Asphodel Meadows, no matter how saintly or sinful they were. You shuffle closer, and the judges watch with unsettling calm. They don't glare or scowl, they simply observe, weighing you silently. There's no booming divine voice announcing charges. Instead, it feels more like being studied by three old teachers who already know whether you did your homework. Minos leans back slightly, as if he's the tiebreaker here, waiting to see if the others disagree before he bothers to weigh in. Rhadamanthus looks sharp, eyes narrowing like a man who notices every inconsistency. Aeacus, meanwhile, has the patient expression of someone who's heard it all before and is already tired of it. Historically, there was also a division of labour. Rhadamanthus judged souls from Asia, Aeacus handled Europe, and Minos presided over the difficult cases. That setup makes the underworld sound suspiciously like an ancient DMV, each judge responsible for their own territory, funneling the undecided cases up to the main desk. Bureaucracy never dies, it just gets mythologized. You try to imagine what your trial would look like here. Would they ask questions, play back a highlight reel of your mistakes, or would it just be yes, followed by a quick nod as you're shuffled to Asphodel like most souls? The myths don't provide much detail about the actual process, probably because no one wanted to imagine a full courtroom drama when contemplating their own funeral. But scholars still debate. Did ordinary people believe their fates would be judged individually, or was this just poetic flair added by philosophers? In Plato's Gorgias, the judges weigh naked souls, stripped of all disguises, examining their true character. But in ritual practices, like burial customs, there's very little evidence of people preparing for an individualized trial. The coin for Charon mattered more than testimony before judges. Maybe these three were more symbolic than literal, a way of saying, yes, there's fairness somewhere in this mess of existence. One of the judges finally raises a hand. You're not sure which, it doesn't matter. The air shifts, heavy as stone, and for a moment you feel the weight of every decision you've ever made pressing down. Then just as quickly it eases. No word spoken, no sentence announced. You've been filed, stamped and moved along, efficient if not exactly reassuring. As you leave the hall, the three figures fade back into the shadows, ready for the next arrival. The torches sputter, and the silence returns. You can't help but feel a strange mix of disappointment and relief. No thunderbolts, no speeches, just the quiet machinery of eternity doing its job, and somehow that's more unnerving than a fiery trial. Here, justice isn't dramatic, it's inevitable. You shuffle away from the judges, expecting maybe fireworks, booming proclamations, or some sort of congratulations, you've unlocked eternal torment announcement. Instead, you walk into nothing. Vast, grey, endless nothing. This is where most souls end up, the so-called ordinary dead folk. Forget the fiery rivers, the glorious meadows, or the poetic punishments for trickster kings. This is the main lobby of the afterlife. And the vibe? Eternal Monday morning. The Greeks called it the Asphodel Meadows, but don't picture golden fields swaying under a perfect sky. Think more like an infinite plain of ghostly grass, pale as bones, swishing without wind. The souls here wander aimlessly, not really suffering, not really rejoicing, just existing. They're shadows of their former selves, stripped of personality, drifting like smoke. No hobbies, no small talk, no eternal wine bars, just walking, standing, staring. If you've ever been trapped at a work retreat with nothing scheduled, you already have the basic idea. Historically, this reflects a key difference between Greek and later religious views. For the Greeks, the afterlife wasn't a reward system. You didn't live a moral life to earn paradise or burn for sins. Unless you were a legendary hero or spectacularly awful, you got the neutral zone. It wasn't punishment, it was just the cosmic default. The thought of eternity as grey monotony may sound dreadful to us, but to the Greeks it was more or less expected. Life was vibrant, death was muted. Simple as that. Here's your quirky fact. Ancient poets sometimes imagined the souls here gossiping faintly about the lives they once lived, like retirees remembering old stories they can't quite piece together. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus encounters the shade of Achilles here, and Achilles grumbles that he'd rather be a servant on earth than a king among the dead. That one line captures the mood perfectly. Better to be alive and miserable than dead and comfortable. Which honestly is a mood. Scholars debate whether this zone was meant to be depressing or simply neutral. Was it a cautionary tale to encourage the living to make the most of their mortal time? Or was it just a way of reflecting the uncertainty of death? An honest shrug from a culture that didn't claim to have all the answers. Some argue that the Asphodel Meadows were deliberately bland, so as not to overshadow the cult promises of the Elysian Fields. If paradise exists for a select few, you can't make the default too appealing. Others suggest the blandness is the point. Without the energy of life, the soul just dissolves into sameness. As you walk among them, the shades barely notice you. Their forms are translucent, their outlines flickering like half-remembered dreams. Some drift in pairs, but not really together. Others wander alone, gazing at nothing. Their eyes look past you, fixed on something that doesn't exist. And the sound, if you can call it sound, is a low murmur, like wind through reeds, a constant backdrop of half-voices whispering and fading. You think about how terrifying it must have been for Greeks to imagine their ancestors here. Not suffering, but also not living. A whole society where your individuality evaporates, leaving you just another shade among millions. That fear shows up in funerary rituals. Families try to anchor their dead with offerings, names carved into stone, stories told at feasts. Anything to keep a spark of identity alive in a place designed to flatten everything into grey. Yet oddly, there's a strange peace to it. No wars, no arguments, no hunger, just quiet persistence. Maybe the ancients weren't entirely wrong. What if eternity is less fire and brimstone, more blankness? The real horror isn't pain, it's boredom. And if you've ever been stuck in a waiting room with no Wi-Fi, you already know that's a fate worse than flames. But the debate continues. Were the Asphodel Meadows literally believed in, or were they symbolic of memory itself? Some modern scholars suggest the grey meadows represent the way the dead fade in human recollection, at first vivid, then gradually featureless, until all that's left is a name on a stone. The soul, then, isn't wandering a literal field, but dissolving into collective forgetfulness, which is almost more chilling than the endless grass. You pause, watching a shade stoop down as if to pluck an asphodel flower. Its fingers pass through the stem, and the flower sways without breaking. The shade doesn't react. It just drifts away, as if it never tried at all. That's the mood here. Endless attempts with no outcomes. Eternal gestures without consequence. Eventually you move on because the staying here too long feels contagious. The meadows stretch forever, pale and identical. And if you linger, you fear you'll dissolve into it too, your story stripped. Your spark gone, the shades don't notice your departure. They never do. They just keep walking endlessly into nothing. After trudging through the grey sameness of the Asphodel Meadows, you finally glimpse a shift in the scenery. The pale grass is thin, and ahead the gloom parts just enough to reveal something shockingly different. Light. Not the dim, oily glow of torches or the eerie shimmer of spectral rivers. Real, golden, sunlight-like radiance spilling across a landscape. You've reached the Elysian Fields, the rarest destination in all of Hades. Think of it as the Underworld's VIP lounge, though the guest list is notoriously exclusive. The Greeks imagined Elysium as a paradise reserved for the extraordinary, heroes, poets, and occasionally a few mortals blessed by the gods. Forget endless wandering. Here the shades live in bliss. Lush meadows, gentle breezes, fragrant flowers, and skies perpetually painted in springtime hues. It's not heaven exactly, but it's the closest thing the Greeks had to it. Unlike the Asphodel Meadows, where everything felt muffled, here the air hums with energy, as if life itself has been condensed into a golden afterglow. Historically, Elysium evolved over time. In Homer's early epics, it was reserved for a tiny elite, heroes related to gods or chosen by them. Later writers broadened the scope slightly, allowing the righteous or virtuous to qualify. By the time of Pindar, the poet, the Elysian Fields had become a recurring image of eternal reward, shimmering at the edge of collective imagination. Still, it was never democratized. Most people knew they'd end up in Asphodel. Elysium was for the 1 in a million souls, the mythological equivalent of don't even bother applying unless you know someone. Here's your quirky fact. Some versions describe Elysium not as one place but as islands, the Isles of the Blessed, floating on the far western edge of the earth, beyond the reach of mortal maps. The souls there supposedly enjoyed endless feasts, music and athletics. Yes, athletics. Imagine running eternal laps, but without fatigue. Apparently the Greeks believed even in death a good workout was paradise. Scholars, of course, can't agree on what Elysium really represented. Was it literal geography, somewhere the soul truly travelled? Or was it allegory, a poetic stand-in for memory and glory? One school of thought argues that Elysium wasn't about the afterlife at all, it was about reputation. Heroes who achieved eternal fame lived in Elysium because they never faded into obscurity. Their names, sung by poets, were their paradise. Another school insists cult rituals, especially the Orphic and Eleusinian mysteries, promised initiates access to these golden meadows, suggesting that Elysium was believed in quite concretely. Did regular Greeks really think they could earn paradise through initiation? Or was it just hopeful marketing? No one can quite pin it down. Walking into Elysium, you can't help but feel the contrast. After the grey monotony of Asphodel, the colours here are almost overwhelming. Shades laugh and speak, real voices, not the muted murmurs of the ordinary dead. Their outlines are sharper, less ghostly. Some even carry the faint glow of vitality, as though the world above never completely let them go. You recognise faces from myths, heroes of the Trojan War, legendary poets, musicians plucking eternal lyres. It feels less like the underworld and more like an exclusive festival that never ends. But here's the thing, paradise still comes with a price. These souls might enjoy their fields of bliss, but they're still separated from the living. Their joy exists only in contrast to the grey outside, and the exclusivity of the place makes it a little bittersweet. Imagine being one of the rare souls to make it here, knowing billions of others are trudging through Asphodel. The meadow glows, yes, but it glows against a backdrop of eternal mediocrity. An odd detail from later Orphic beliefs. Some initiates carried tiny gold tablets into their graves, inscribed with instructions for the afterlife. These tablets often contain directions like, turn left at the fountain, drink from Monotony, and you'll find the way to Elysium. Literal cheat sheets for eternity. Archaeologists have unearthed them in graves across southern Italy and Greece. It's as if people wanted a cosmic GPS to ensure they didn't accidentally wander into Cositas, Primordials, when they could be basking in paradise. Yet scholars still argue, were these gold tablets promises of real reward, or were they symbolic affirmations for the grieving? If you buried your loved one with a map to Elysium, did you believe they'd actually follow it? Or did it just soften the sting of loss, giving you the comfort of imagining them in golden fields? That question hangs unanswered. Shimmering like Elysium itself, beautiful but out of reach. You stand at the edge of the fields, hesitant to step further. The souls here don't seem to notice you. Their laughter and music float past, warm but distant. Maybe that's the point. Elysium isn't for visitors. It's for the chosen few who earned eternity's best real estate. You breathe in the scent of flowers that never wilt, and for a moment you almost believe you could stay. But then you remember, paradise isn't part of your itinerary. You're just passing through, a guest in a place that doesn't accept walk-ins. The golden glow of Elysium fades slowly behind you, and with it goes the brief illusion of joy. What remains is the sense that you've walked through a dream only meant for a select few. But just when you think paradise has slipped away entirely, you notice something even rarer shimmering in the distance. Beyond Elysium, across an invisible threshold, lie the Isles of the Blessed. This isn't just a meadow or a field, it's the underworld's penthouse suite, the reward above rewards. If Elysium is the VIP lounge, the Isles are the presidential suite no one ever checks out of. The Greeks described the Isles as a place reserved for the best of the best, not just heroes, but heroes who lived virtuously enough to be reincarnated and achieve Elysium not once, not twice, but 3 times. Only then did they earn a spot here, in bliss that never ended. Imagine the mythological equivalent of getting to paradise being told, nice work, now do it all again, twice. Eternal reward required a trial period, apparently. Historically, Hesiod mentions the Isles as lying far to the west, past the known world, washed by ocean breezes that kept them forever fresh and fertile. Later writers imagined them as floating islands, basking in soft sunlight, where the air was always calm and the ground sprouted fruits without labour. Homeric heroes like Achilles were sometimes rumoured to dwell here, their glory so immense that ordinary Elysium wasn't enough. For a culture obsessed with reputation, this was the final stamp of immortality. Here's your quirky fact. Pindar, the Greek poet, once described the Isles of the Blessed as having games and contests in eternal rotation, basically a never-ending Olympics. Imagine training your whole life for sports, dying, and then discovering your eternal reward is more sports. Though to be fair, in paradise you'd never sprain an ankle or lose your breath. So maybe that's the upgrade, but scholars debate the Isles fiercely. Some argue they weren't part of the underworld at all, but a separate utopia on the Earth's edge, a sort of distant paradise accessible only by divine transport. Others insist they were simply the ultimate zone within Hades, the shimmering crown jewel at the farthest point. Which is it? A mystical island chain on the horizon, or the top tier of an underworld hierarchy? Ancient authors never agreed, and modern scholars still circle the question. You walk closer, and the ground beneath you changes. The cold stone of Hades softens into grass, not the grey asphodel of the meadows, but rich green, dotted with wildflowers that look like they were painted fresh that morning. The air feels lighter here, almost breathable. In the distance you can make out figures, shays glowing faintly gold, laughing, embracing, living out a peace denied to the rest of humanity. They don't look ghostly, they look restored, like their souls were given back the vitality stolen by death. This is where the very few live eternally as if alive, a place where sorrow has no foothold. You hear faint music drifting across the air, not like Orpheus's sorrowful lyre, but like a celebration that never winds down. And yet, you're struck by how lonely it feels at the same time. Paradise is paradise, yes, but if it's only for the tiniest fraction of humanity, doesn't that exclusivity make it bittersweet? The isles glow against the backdrop of infinite shadows, their beauty magnified by how unreachable they are. Oddly enough, some Orphic beliefs hinted that initiates into their mysteries could shortcut to the Isles. Gold tablets discovered in graves sometimes mention routes to the Blessed Isles, instructions for skipping the reincarnation cycle entirely. Were these promises genuine, or just the ancient religious equivalent of a fast-pass ticket? Scholars debate whether ordinary initiates really believed they could leapfrog the system, or if the imagery was just aspirational. After all, it's comforting to imagine your loved one basking in ocean breezes instead of trudging in Asphodel. The debate circles back to reputation versus spirituality. Were the Isles reserved for those whose stories were remembered forever, like Achilles and Heracles? Or could the truly initiated soul earn entry regardless of fame? If memory and glory are the only ticket, then the Isles are really a metaphor for storytelling. The place where heroes never fade because their names keep being sung. If mystery cult initiation mattered more, then the Isles reflect spiritual promise, a sacred escape from the monotony of ordinary death. Both readings overlap, shimmering like the Isles themselves, half metaphor, half geography, wholly elusive. You pause at the shore, gazing at the faint silhouettes of the islands across a silver horizon. You know you won't be allowed to step foot there, and not tonight. The Isles are for the eternally blessed, not the casual tourist. But just seeing them is enough to plant the seed of wonder, that maybe, just maybe, beyond the grey fields and fiery pits, there is a place where life doesn't just end, but renews into perfection. You turn back at last, letting the shimmer fade behind you. The Isles don't vanish. They linger in your mind like the memory of a dream you can't quite let go of. And maybe that's their true purpose, to remind mortals, even in death, to keep imagining a better horizon. Leaving behind the shimmer of the Isles, you step back into a dimmer, flatter stretch of terrain, and the shift is jarring. No golden glow, no blessed breezes, no music from eternal banquets. Just an endless plain that looks like someone pressed the desaturate button on existence. This is the Asphodel Meadows in their fullest form, the true mass housing of the afterlife. If Elysium was paradise for the select few, and the Isles were the elite penthouse, then this is the commuter suburb for everyone else. The ground is covered with asphodel flowers, pale and ghostly, their petals swaying though no wind moves. They aren't ugly exactly, but they're monotonous. Row upon row of faint blossoms, too bland to inspire joy, too repetitive to inspire dread. The souls drifting here match the landscape. Quiet, indistinct, their outlines faint, as if personality itself has been gently bleached away. If you've ever walked into an office where everyone looks like they've accepted their fate long ago, you get the idea. Historically, the Asphodel Meadows were considered the default destination for most souls. Not good enough for Elysium, not evil enough for Tartarus, just here. Homer's Odyssey hints at this when Odysseus travels to the underworld and sees ordinary souls drifting aimlessly. The point wasn't to terrify, it was to emphasize that immortality doesn't equal excitement. For the Greeks, the afterlife wasn't about cosmic reward or punishment for most people. It was about inevitability. Here's the quirky fact. The asphodel plant itself was real, common in Greece, and often planted near graves. Its roots were edible, though bland, and some thought it provided food for the dead. Imagine your eternal diet consisting of ghostly potatoes. Yum. Archaeologists have even found asphodel remains near burial sites, suggesting families offered them to the deceased as symbolic snacks for the journey. Scholars debate what the Asphodel Meadows really meant. Some argue it's a poetic metaphor for forgetfulness, where individuality dissolves and souls lose their spark, blending into a collective haze. Others believe it was meant as a reflection of how the average Greek saw their fate, not terrifying flames or glorious paradise, but something in between, a neutral continuation stripped of vitality. And then there's the Orphic angle. Gold tablets buried with initiates often included instructions to avoid the dull meadow of forgetfulness and head for brighter springs instead. To the Orphics, Asphodel wasn't just neutral, it was a trap, a cosmic cul-de-sac for the unprepared. You walk further in and the monotony starts to work on you. Time loses meaning. The souls don't speak much. When they do, it's in whispers too faint to follow. Every face looks familiar, but not because you know them, because they all look vaguely the same. Identity here is like a photocopy of a photocopy, blurred until it's interchangeable. That's the unsettling part. No one is suffering, no one is laughing. They're just waiting forever. And yet, there's a strange kind of peace in it. No pain, no ambition, no need to prove anything. Just existence, stripped to its quietest form. Maybe that's why the Greeks weren't horrified by Asphodel, in the same way we might be. For them, the real tragedy was missing out on glory in life, not being denied it in death. If you didn't achieve fame or divine favour, you knew you'd be here, and most people seem to accept that. Still, the debate continues. Is Asphodel meant to comfort or to caution? Some scholars say it served as a reminder to live fully, because death offered no excitement. Others see it as a merciful equalizer. Not everyone could be Achilles, but at least everyone had somewhere to drift, safe from torment. And maybe that's its quiet gift. No matter how mediocre your life, there's still a place for you. You pause and look around, imagining eternity here. Would you eventually grow used to it, blending into the sameness? Or would the lack of sensation gnaw at you forever? Hard to say. The souls here don't complain. They've long forgotten how. The meadow stretches endlessly in all directions, pale blossoms swaying, voices fading into murmurs. It's not hell. It's not heaven. It's something far stranger, forever without edges. You keep walking, and the flat monotony of the Asphodel Meadows begins to slope downward. The air grows heavier, thicker, like breathing through damp cloth. The pale blossoms vanish, replaced by jagged stone, and the grey horizon deepens into something blacker, more final. You've reached the rim of Tartarus, the pit at the bottom of everything, the place reserved not for ordinary souls, but for cosmic criminals and ancient monsters. If Asphodel is eternity's waiting room, Tartarus is its maximum security prison. The Greeks imagined Tartarus as deeper than the deepest abyss. Hesiod once wrote that if a bronze anvil fell from heaven, it would take 9 days to reach Earth, and then 9 more to fall from Earth into Tartarus. That's how far down this place is, so deep it defies imagination. Unlike the rest of Hades, which is shadowy but still recognisably a realm, Tartarus is chaos, an abyss of eternal confinement, and its inmates, titans, giants, and any other creature who had dared challenge the Olympian order. Historically, Tartarus played a huge role in the story of the gods' rise to power. After the Titanomachy, the great war between Olympians and Titans, Zeus cast the defeated Titans into Tartarus. Bound in chains, guarded by monstrous sentinels, they were kept far from the world of mortals. Later myths added other famous residents: Typhon, the storm giant who nearly dethroned Zeus, the 100-handed ones, both jailers and prisoners at various times, and the primordial forces too dangerous to roam free. Think of Tartarus as the cosmic oubliette. Once you're in, you're never spoken of again. Here's your quirky fact. In some versions, Tartarus wasn't just a prison, it was also a primordial deity, one of the first beings to exist at the dawn of creation. Tartarus as a god embodied the abyss itself, a personality made of endless depth. Imagine being not just in the dungeon, but being the dungeon. It's like the universe decided even prisons deserve their own god. Scholars debate whether Tartarus was considered part of the underworld or something entirely separate. Was it simply the basement of Hades, or was it another dimension altogether, older and darker than even Hades himself? The language in Hesiod suggests it was as far below the earth as the sky is above it, which implies it wasn't so much a room in the house of death as a parallel void. Later poets blurred the line, describing it as just another wing of Hades, albeit the nastiest one. The disagreement continues, and maybe that's fitting. How do you categorize a place meant to be beyond comprehension? As you peer into the pit, the air vibrates with low booming sounds. Distant groans, the clank of chains, the occasional rumble that shakes the stone beneath your feet. You don't see the titans directly, but their presence is undeniable. Somewhere down there, Cronus, father of Zeus, writhes in eternal captivity. Nearby, Hyperion, Iapetus, and others share his fate. They aren't punished with the ironic torments like Sisyphus or Tantalus. They're just bound, silenced, erased from cosmic politics. Out of sight, out of mind, but never out of memory. And yet, some myths hint that Tartarus wasn't completely escape-proof. Typhon, the monstrous storm being, once burst free long enough to nearly overthrow Olympus, hurling mountains and spewing fire. Only after a catastrophic battle did Zeus imprison him again, this time beneath Mount Etna, where his rumbling supposedly causes volcanic eruptions. Scholars debate whether this myth was metaphor, volcanoes explained as the breathing of a buried monster, or an allegory for suppressed chaos always threatening to return. Either way, Tartarus wasn't just a prison, it was a pressure cooker. You stand at the edge, the darkness below swallowing sight. There's no gate here, no Cerberus lounging by the door. Tartarus doesn't need guards. Its depth alone is enough. Even if you fell, you'd never stop falling. The sheer scale of the abyss makes Asphodel feel almost cozy by comparison. At least there was ground beneath your feet. Here, eternity feels like weightlessness in a void that hates you. Another debate lingers. Was Tartarus a moral prison, or just a mythic landfill for dangerous beings? Mortals rarely ended up here. A few truly wicked souls were said to be hurled into Tartarus, but most accounts reserve it for beings of cosmic scale. So was it hell? Not quite. It was more like a divine holding cell, a reminder that even gods feared the forces lurking beneath. You back away from the rim, because staring too long makes your stomach twist. The booming echoes fade into the stone, leaving only silence behind. Tartarus stays hidden, a nightmare contained, but its presence lingers in your thoughts. It's the kind of place that makes even Asphodel look like a blessing. The ground trembles faintly beneath your steps as you move away from Tartarus, but the vibrations follow you, as though the abyss has reached invisible tendrils through the underworld's bedrock. Soon you find yourself entering a darker quarter, not the neutral blankness of Asphodel, not the distant shimmer of Elysium, but a place designed specifically for punishment. Here dwell the souls whose names became cautionary tales. Men and women condemned to eternal torment, their misdeeds immortalized not through glory but through creative, ironic torture. Welcome to the roll call of the eternally unlucky. The first figure you notice is Sisyphus, forever hunched, straining against his massive boulder. He digs his heels into the ground, sweat dripping, even though he has no body left to sweat with. He pushes, groans, and slowly, painfully, manages to roll the stone up the steep incline. Just when he nears the summit, the rock slips, rumbling downward, thunderclap forcing him to start again. The punishment fits the crime. In life, Sisyphus was notorious for trick-kiri, cheating death itself twice, once even chaining Thanatos so mortals stopped dying altogether. Zeus wasn't amused. The boulder became his karmic punchline. Nearby is Tantalus, a figure wading in a pool of clear water, a tree above him heavy with fruit. He reaches down, water recedes. He stretches upward, the branches pull back. Eternity for him is endless thirst and hunger, always a fingertip away from relief. His crime, depending on the version, it was stealing ambrosia from the gods, betraying divine secrets, or, most infamously, serving his own son as a meal to Olympus. Whatever the reason, his name gave us the modern word tantalize, proof that the Greeks had a flair for turning suffering into vocabulary. And then there's Ixion, strapped eternally to a flaming spinning wheel. In life he murdered his father-in-law and then had the audacity to lust after Hera, Zeus's queen. His punishment? Perpetual disorientation, flung endlessly through the air, never landing, always burning. If Sisyphus is the image of futility and Tantalus the image of frustration, Ixion is the image of dizzying chaos. You almost pity him, until you remember his crimes. Here's your quirky fact. Some sources add more obscure figures to this rogues gallery. One is the Danids, 50 sisters who murdered their husbands on their wedding night, except for one who spared hers. Their eternal punishment? Hauling water in leaking jars, pouring endlessly into a basin that never fills. If Sisyphus had a union, the Danaids would be honorary members. Scholars debate what these punishments meant to the Greeks. Were they literal expectations of the afterlife or moral parables meant to warn the living? Many argue the latter. After all, these stories were often told in public settings, reminding citizens of the consequences of hubris and betrayal. But others point out that the myths resonated too strongly to be merely metaphor. Rituals around graves sometimes referenced appeasing the dead, suggesting that at least some Greeks feared their ancestors might suffer below, if not properly honoured. You watch Sisyphus strain again, his muscles bulging as he heaves against the boulder. For a brief second you imagine the satisfaction he might feel in that instant just before the rock tumbles back down. A taste of accomplishment, instantly undone. Tantalus, meanwhile, stares longingly at the water rippling around his knees, his hands trembling with desperation he'll never quench. These torments don't just punish, they amplify desires into torture. The real cruelty isn't pain, it's the promise of relief withheld forever. And yet, the debate lingers. Do these stories reflect divine justice or divine pettiness? Was Zeus delivering cosmic fairness, or just flexing his power in cruelly ironic ways? Philosophers like Plato later reimagined these punishments as allegories for the human condition. Endless striving, endless frustration, endless cycles we impose on ourselves. Maybe Sisyphus isn't just a mythic king, maybe he's every human stuck in routines that never end. And maybe Tantalus is every person chasing satisfaction that always slips away. The underworld around you hums with these stories, each punishment a grim little lesson carved into eternity. You feel a strange shiver as you realise how familiar they are. Sisyphus, Tantalus, Ixion, the Danids, they're not just figures of myth, they're mirrors, reflecting the frustrations and failures of mortal life, exaggerated into infinity. That's what makes them haunting, not their distance, but their closeness. You move on, leaving the groans and curses behind, though the echo of rolling stone and splashing water follows you. The punished don't notice your presence. They're too wrapped in their cycles, too consumed by struggles that will never end. And maybe that's the scariest part. Not that they suffer, but that they suffer without progress, without change. Eternity as the ultimate rut. The echoes of groaning boulders and splashing, unreachable water fade as you continue. But the air grows thicker again, buzzing with a new kind of tension. It feels electric, charged, as though anger itself has taken on a physical form. You've entered the domain of the Erinyes, better known as the Furies. If Cerberus was the underworld's guard dog, these are its bloodhounds, unleashed whenever cosmic justice demands vengeance. Unlike the judges, who sit quietly weighing souls, the Furies chase, torment and punish those who wronged family, broke oaths or shed innocent blood. Their job description is less clerical work and more divine hit squad. You spot them before you hear them. Tall winged figures, hair writhing with serpents, eyes glowing with a predatorial gleam. Their hands clutch whips or torches, and when they move, it's with a terrible swiftness that makes the shadows recoil. Imagine the worst teacher you ever had, multiply her by 3 and give her snake hair and a bad temper. That's the vibe. The Greeks named the trio Alecto, the unceasing, Megaera, the grudging, and Tisiphone, the avenger of murder. Together, they made sure no oathbreaker or kinslayer could ever rest. Historically, too, the Furies were ancient, older than most Olympians. Some myths say they were born from the blood of Uranus when Cronus castrated him, meaning vengeance itself was as old as the gods. Others claimed they were daughters of Nyx, night personified. Either way, they weren't just employees of Hades. They were primal forces woven into the fabric of justice itself. Here's your quirky fact. The Furies had a bit of a PR problem. In Athens, people avoided calling them Erinyes directly, since it sounded too terrifying. Instead, they used a polite euphemism, Eumenides, meaning the kindly ones. The idea was that flattering them might soften their wrath, basically ancient Greek reverse psychology. Imagine calling a pack of terrifying monsters sweethearts, in hopes they don't tear your face off. Bold move, Athens. Scholars debate what the Furies truly represented. Were they literal avengers stalking guilty mortals into the afterlife? Or were they personifications of guilt itself, gnawing at the conscience until madness set in? In plays like Aeschylus' Eumenides, they hunt Orestes after he murders his mother, driving him into fits of torment. But the resolution comes not through their destruction, but through their transformation. Athena integrates them into the Athenian court system, turning primal vengeance into lawful justice. Some scholars see this as a symbolic evolution, society moving from blood-feud retribution to civic order. The Furies weren't destroyed, they were repurposed. As you watch them circle, you notice how they move in sync, weaving through the shadows like vultures scenting blood. Their whips crack the air, though no victims appear right now. Maybe they're resting between hunts, or maybe they're waiting for someone who's still alive to make a catastrophic mistake. That thought alone makes you stand a little straighter. Even here, the Furies feel dangerously close. Their presence reminds you of something else. The Greeks didn't think you could escape guilt by dying. If you broke an oath or murdered kin, the Furies would pursue you into the underworld. Death wasn't an escape hatch, it was just a change of scenery. That idea, chilling as it is, reflects a deeper cultural truth. Justice wasn't optional. You couldn't run from it, not even with your last breath. Oddly enough, there's evidence that the Furies were also worshipped, though not in the same festive way as Zeus or Apollo. At sacred sites like Colonus, Athenians offered libations to them, not to curry favour, but to keep them appeased. The Erinyes weren't gods you wanted to invite into your home, but you also didn't want them angry at you. It's like tipping the angriest barista so your coffee doesn't come with spit. The scholarly debate here is whether the Erinyes reflect a universal guilt mechanism in human psychology, or whether they were purely religious constructs. Psychoanalytic interpretations love the idea that they are just externalized conscience, dramatized as winged snake-haired tormentors. Others argue they were much more literal to the Greeks, divine forces you could pray to, bribe, or fear. The truth is probably somewhere in between. One of them notices you, Alecto maybe, and her gaze locks on yours. It's not hatred, it's assessment. As if she's flipping through your file deciding whether you belong on her to-do list. You feel your stomach clench. Then, just as quickly, she turns away, her snakes hissing quietly, her attention already drifting to some unseen quarry. That's worse than being attacked. To be acknowledged, but not prioritized, means your time hasn't come yet. You step carefully, giving the trio a wide berth. The air feels charged, like static before a storm, and every instinct screams not to linger. The Furies don't need you now, but the thought follows you like an echo. Somewhere, sometime, for someone they'll strike. And when they do, it won't just be punishment, it'll be inevitability with a whip. The path pulls you deeper into the underworld, and the temperature shifts again. Not colder this time, but heavier, like a blanket of shadows draped across your shoulders. The gloom thickens, and for the first time you sense presences that don't belong to Hades or Persephone, or even to the souls drifting in meadows and pits. These are older, darker beings who predate the Olympians altogether. You've wandered into the domain of Nyx and the primordial shadows, forces so ancient that even the gods treat them with respect. Nyx, the goddess of night, isn't just another deity in the Greek roster. She's one of the primal beings, born at the dawn of existence, sibling to Chaos and Gaia. Homer describes her as so powerful that even Zeus, with all his thunderbolts and bravado, avoided crossing her. Imagine the king of the gods tiptoeing past somebody because, frankly, she's scarier. That's Nyx. Here's your quirky fact. Nyx was said to live in a cave so far from the sun that day and night passed one another at the entrance, never mingling. One half of the cave always held darkness, the other half light. In some traditions, she wasn't just night itself. She was mother to a whole brood of shadowy children. Hypnos, sleep. Thanatos, death. Moros, doom. Nemesis, retribution. And even the fates themselves. So, yes, when you feel tired, cursed, or unlucky, you can technically blame Nyx's extended family. Scholars debate whether Nyx was ever truly worshipped in the same sense as Zeus or Apollo. Temples to her are rare, but fragments of ritual suggest she was invoked in Orphic hymns and mystery cults. Some argue she was too abstract, too terrifyingly vast to be given wine offerings and cheerful festivals. Instead, that she was acknowledged in whispers, honoured as an inevitability rather than courted as a patron. Others counter that her imagery in art and poetry suggest she was deeply embedded in the Greek imagination, perhaps more as a cosmic principle than as a personal deity. As you stand in the thick darkness, you feel her presence. It isn't sharp or threatening, it's enveloping. The kind of silence that wraps around your ears until even your heartbeat feels muted. You don't see her face, no one does, but you sense the outline of vast wings, feathers dripping with shadow, stretching from horizon to horizon. The weight of her gaze presses down like midnight on the longest winter night. But Nyx doesn't stand alone here. Around her, you catch glimpses of her children, Hypnos drifting close, soft-eyed and drowsy, carrying the aura of sleep, Thanatos, more skeletal, carrying the hush of death, Nemesis, fierce-eyed, her scales balancing unseen weights. These beings are less gods you pray to and more inevitabilities you endure. They don't demand shrines so much as acknowledgement. Their work shapes mortal lives whether you notice them or not. Oddly, some myths describe Hypnos as living near the entrance to Hades, in a cave filled with poppies, where no light or sound ever entered. His twin Thanatos was gentler than most expect, more guide than executioner. Greeks didn't see death as malicious, just unavoidable, and Thanatos embodied that quiet hand on the shoulder that says, "Time to go." Scholars argue about how much these figures were real to worshippers versus poetic personifications. Were people picturing literal beings, or just using myth to describe universal forces? The ambiguity lingers, just like shadows themselves. You move carefully, sensing that this is not a place for noise or questions. The primordial presences don't notice you, or if they do, they simply don't care. To beings this old, a mortal soul is less than a flicker, more like dust swirling in their eternal night. That realization is strangely humbling. You're not feared here, not judged, not even punished. You're just irrelevant. Yet, that irrelevance is oddly comforting. In a realm filled with punishments, judgments, and watchful guardians, Nyx's shadows remind you that not every part of existence revolves around your story. Some forces predate you and will outlast you, untouched by your choices, and maybe that's the true weight of night, not terror but perspective. The darkness grows thicker the longer you linger, until your body feels transparent, as if the shadows are pulling at your edges, testing how much of you they can absorb. You step back slowly, retracing your way toward the faint glimmer of torchlight in the distance. Nyx doesn't follow. She doesn't need to. Night always returns, whether in the mortal world or the underworld, folding over everything in its time. The darkness of Nyx thins as you step forward, and soon a softer glow greets you, not harsh like the fires of Phlegethon or eerie like the torches of the Furies, but muted, like candlelight filtering through gauze. You've wandered into the quieter heart of the underworld, Persephone's court. If Hades rules like a silent accountant tallying souls, Persephone brings ritual, rhythm, and something resembling grace. Her presence softens the edges of death, giving the realm a cadence rather than a void. The court isn't a palace in the marble-columned, golden-roofed sense. Instead, it feels like a hall of living stone, walls damp and glistening, with veins of quartz catching faint light like stars trapped underground. Ghostly figures move slowly through the space, shades attending ceremonies you don't fully understand. Offerings of pomegranate seeds and dark libations sit on blackened altars. Every action here is deliberate, as though Persephone herself insists that even in death, there will be ritual, order, and meaning. Historically, Persephone's court had deep ties to the Eleusinian mysteries, the secretive rites practiced in her honour and her mother Demeter's. These rituals promised initiates hope of a gentler afterlife, suggesting that Persephone, queen of both bloom and shadow, could guide souls beyond despair. The mysteries were so well guarded that even today we only know fragments, processions with torches, fasting followed by feasting, and sacred objects shown only to initiates. To the Greeks, Persephone wasn't just queen of death. She was also the promise that death could be transformed into something bearable. Here's your quirky fact. In some regions, Persephone was honoured as Kor, meaning simply the maiden. Farmers prayed to her not only for fertile fields, but for the return of spring itself. This created a strange duality. Above ground, she was the innocent daughter of Demeter, but below, she was the solemn queen who shared Hades' throne. Two identities, one goddess. Imagine juggling those roles, eternal spring break and eternal graveyard shift, every single year. Scholars debate whether Persephone truly had autonomy in her role. Was she a captive queen, forced to reign beside Hades because of the pomegranate trick, or did she embrace her power, evolving from abducted maiden into sovereign ruler? Ancient art reflects both views. Some vase paintings show her as a demure figure beside Hades, while others depict her enthroned commanding ships and even blessing initiates. The ambiguity seems intentional. Persephone embodies contradiction, victim and ruler, daughter and queen, life and death. You move deeper into her court, and the air hums with quiet ceremony. Shades kneel at altars, pouring libations of shadowy liquid onto the stone. Whispered hymns echo softly, their words indistinct but heavy with reverence. At the far end, you glimpse Persephone herself, seated on a throne beside Hades' empty chair. Unlike his obsidian seat, hers gleams faintly, carved with patterns of flowers and vines, as though even here she insists on weaving traces of life into death's design. She doesn't look at you directly, but you feel her presence like warmth pressing into the cold stone. Her hands rest lightly on her lap, fingers curled around a sprig of wheat. That single detail is enough to collapse the distance between above and below, spring and winter, life and death. It's a reminder. She isn't just in this world. She is the link between both. The scholarly debate about Persephone's court touches on ritual. Were the ceremonies here imagined as a continuation of the Eleusinian rites, with Persephone rewarding initiates in the underworld? Or were they purely symbolic, a way for the living to project order onto death's chaos? Archaeological finds, small figurines of Persephone, torches and kernels of grain buried in tombs suggest people really believed she could mediate between worlds. Was this faith practical comfort or cosmic truth? The silence of the court doesn't answer. You notice that her attendants, shades who drift near her throne, seem sharper than those in the meadows. Their outlines are clearer, their gazes steadier. Perhaps Persephone grants them dignity simply by proximity. If Hades is inevitability, Persephone is memory, the part of the soul that resists fading. She gives ritual where otherwise there would only be silence. And then, briefly, her gaze flicks toward you. It's not the cold assessment of the Furies or the indifference of Nyx. It's recognition, the kind of look that says, I see you, I know what you've carried here. And for a fleeting second you almost feel absolved. Then her attention shifts back to her court, the moment gone like a whisper swallowed by stone. You step back, careful not to disturb the rituals continuing around you. The faint hymns rise and fall, the shades move with quiet purpose, and Persephone remains enthroned, the eternal hinge between worlds. Her court doesn't terrify, it steadies. And maybe that's the most unsettling thing of all, that even death can feel orderly when she is near. Leaving Persephone's court behind, you find yourself in a corridor that feels strangely familiar, as though you've walked it before in a dream. The air is lighter here, stirred by the faint sound of footsteps, different footsteps. Not shades wandering aimlessly, not judges pacing their halls, but mortals. For a moment you think you've somehow stumbled onto a group of tourists, but no, these are heroes, figures who descended into Hades while still alive. You're entering the part of the underworld visited by the bold, the curious, and the foolishly stubborn. The most famous of these visitors is Odysseus, that wily king of Ithaca, whose homecoming took longer than most people's careers. In Homer's Odyssey, he journeys to the underworld seeking guidance from the prophet Tiresias. His experience is eerie, even by Greek standards. He digs a trench, pours libations of honey, milk, wine, and blood, and the shades swarm to drink. Among them, he meets not only Tiresias, but also his mother, who died while he was away at war. Their conversation is heartbreaking. She tells him how she wasted away longing for him, and he reaches for her 3 times, only for her form to dissolve each time. No monsters, no dramatic chases, just grief, regret, and the reminder that death separates in ways no strength can bridge. Here's your quirky fact. Odysseus isn't technically in Hades in the Odyssey. Scholars argue that Homer's underworld scene is more of a necromantic ritual on the edge of the world rather than a full descent into the underworld proper. Later authors blurred the distinction, but if you're a purist, Odysseus was standing at the door rather than inside. Still, the imagery stuck, and his visit became one of the most famous descents in literature. Scholars debate what Odysseus' journey meant. Was it a literal belief that heroes could call up the dead for advice, or a poetic metaphor for memory and longing? Some see it as Homer's way of acknowledging that even the cleverest man needs wisdom from the past. Others note that necromancy was a real practice in Greece and Italy, with shrines like the Necromanteion of Acheron claiming to offer communication with the dead. Was Homer describing fiction or reflecting actual rituals? No one agrees, which only makes the story more haunting. You walk further and encounter another visitor, Aeneas, the Trojan hero who, at least in Roman imagination, became the ancestor of Rome itself. In Virgil's Aeneid, Aeneas descends into the underworld with the Sibyl, a prophetess, as his guide. His journey is far more structured than Odysseus's. He crosses rivers, passes Cerberus, and walks through regions of both punishment and reward. Eventually he meets his father, Anchises, who reveals Rome's future in a grand vision of glory. It's less about personal grief and more about destiny, the underworld as a theatre for political prophecy. And then, of course, there's Heracles. His underworld trip was more of a brawl than a pilgrimage. As part of his 12 labours, he descended to capture Cerberus and drag him to the surface. Most accounts suggest he succeeded not through trickery or payment, but sheer brute strength, because apparently, when faced with eternity's most terrifying guard dog, Heracles just thought, "I'll wrestle it." Scholars debate whether this myth reflected actual cult practices, since Heracles was widely worshipped as a figure who conquered death itself. Did people believe he literally beat up the underworld? Or was it symbolic of heroic defiance? Again, myth doesn't offer a neat answer. You realise how strange this place is. It's not reserved for the dead, it's a kind of crossroads where mortals on special missions step briefly into eternity. Heroes come not to stay, but to visit, to learn, to prove themselves. The underworld becomes less a final resting place and more a stage for human stories to collide with cosmic ones. You pause by a faintly glowing trench, Odysseus's maybe, and watch shades rise, their mouths opening to drink. You almost expect Tiresias to appear, eyes clouded, words sharp, but then the vision fades, leaving only shadows. That's the thing about these heroic visits. They leave echoes, but the living never linger long, and yet the debate lingers too. Were these myths just entertainment, or did they reflect genuine hope that the living could touch the dead? Mystery cults often promised communion with the afterlife, and necromantic rituals certainly existed. Maybe Odysseus, Aeneas, and Heracles weren't just stories. Maybe they were echoes of real practices, dramatized into legend. You continue walking, hearing footsteps that aren't yours, echoes of mortals who dared to tread where you now stand. Their visits were brief, their purposes different, but all shared the same truth. Even the greatest of heroes couldn't stay. The underworld doesn't make exceptions. You can visit, you can glimpse, you can fight, but in the end, it's not your realm. Not yet. The echo of heroic footsteps fades, and the quiet hum of the underworld wraps back around you. But this time, the silence doesn't last. Somewhere in the distance, a faint strain of music drifts through the air. Soft, mournful, achingly human. You follow it instinctively, drawn toward its fragile beauty, until you see him. Orpheus, the poet-musician whose songs could charm rocks, rivers, and even the heart of Hades himself. His story is the most famous love tragedy to pass through these halls, and it plays here on eternal repeat. Orpheus was no warrior, no king. His weapon was the lyre, his power the ability to bend all living things, and apparently the dead toward his music. When his wife Eurydice died from a snakebite, he refused to accept it. Instead of grieving like a normal human, he marched into the underworld, strumming his lyre with such sorrow that every obstacle gave way. Cerberus lowered his heads and whimpered, the Furies shed tears, and even Persephone's stern court paused to listen. Hades, famously immovable, was moved. He agreed to let Eurydice return, on one condition: Orpheus must walk ahead without looking back until they both reached the surface. Here's your quirky fact. Some versions of the story say Orpheus almost succeeded. He led Eurydice all the way up the path, the faint light of the world above just ahead, but at the last moment doubt gnawed at him. Was she really there, or had Hades tricked him? He glanced back, and in that instant she dissolved into the shadow, gone forever. It's the kind of myth that explains itself. Don't doubt, don't falter, or love slipped away. Scholars debate the meaning of this tale. Is it a tragic love story about human frailty, an allegory for the inevitability of death, showing that no art, however divine, can truly conquer it? Or is it a philosophical commentary suggesting that the living and the dead can never fully reunite, no matter how much they longed out to? Some even argue the myth reflects ritual practices, where initiates symbolically followed Orpheus's path through music and darkness, embodying the journey between life and death. You watch as Orpheus walks, his shoulders hunched, his lyre dangling at his side. The music falters, then swells again as if he's forever trying to undo the glance he already gave. Eurydice's shade follows faintly behind him, her form pale, her steps so quiet you wonder if she knows this version of the story can never end differently. Every time he turns, she fades. Every time she fades, his song begins again, is less a tale than a loop playing over and over in the underworld's memory. And yet, there's a twist in later versions. Some poets claim Orpheus never truly lost Eurydice, at least not spiritually. His grief turned him into a prophet, the founder of Orphic mysteries that promise secret knowledge of death and rebirth. According to this angle, his failure wasn't the end, but the beginning. Out of his despair grew teachings that offered hope to others. Scholars argue about whether the Orphic religion was really founded by Orpheus, or simply attributed to him as a legendary figure. Either way, his story seeded centuries of mystical speculation. You pause and imagine yourself in his place. Could you walk that entire path without looking back? Could anyone? The condition isn't just cruel, it's psychologically impossible. Humans are wired to doubt, to check, to glance over their shoulders. That's what makes Orpheus's failure so universal. His tragedy isn't about weakness, it's about being human. The music swells again, filling the shadows with aching beauty. Even knowing the outcome, you still hope he won't turn this time, hope Eurydice will step into the light. But of course he does. He always does. The underworld holds on to her, and his cry echoes off the stone like the sound of every love lost too soon. And that's why Orpheus's myth endures. It's not just a story about the dead, it's a story about the living, about the unbearable weight of grief and the limits of even the greatest talent. Music can charm gods, but it can't change fate. Love can inspire impossible journeys, but it can't erase mortality. That's the lesson carved into the shadows here. Sometimes even your best isn't enough. You turn away at last, letting the song fade into silence. But it lingers in your chest, heavy and fragile, like a memory you can't shake. Orpheus will keep playing, Eurydice will keep fading, and the underworld will keep reminding you that some endings can't be rewritten. The mournful chords of Orpheus's lyre still echo faintly behind you, but the mood of the underworld shifts as you follow the next path. The air grows heavier, less mournful and more combative. Somewhere ahead, the silence is broken by the sound of a grunt, the slam of bodies colliding, the growl of something very large and very annoyed. You've wandered into the memory of Heracles' visit, one of the loudest, most disruptive intrusions the underworld has ever endured. Heracles wasn't here for poetic reasons or prophetic wisdom. He wasn't here to mourn a loved one or to start a religion. He was here for work, his 12th labour, the most daunting of them all, capturing Cerberus and dragging him back to the land of the living. Imagine being given that assignment. Oh, by the way, for your final task, could you just pop down to Hades, wrestle the three-headed death hound, and bring him topside? Thanks, champ. In most versions, Heracles didn't sneak past the god of the dead. He confronted him directly. Hades, oddly enough, agreed to let him try, on one condition. He could take Cerberus only if he subdued the beast without using weapons, which meant no arrows, no club, no poisoned hydra blood. Just bare hands against the underworld's most terrifying guard dog. Here's your quirky fact. Vase paintings often show Heracles hauling Cerberus by a chain, the dog snarling while the hero looks almost casual, like he's dragging home a particularly unruly pet. Some versions even say Heracles wore the lion skin of the Nemean lion during the fight, giving him extra protection against the hound's snapping jaws. To mortals, the feat looked ridiculous. To the Greeks, it was proof that Heracles embodied strength so absurd he could muscle his way through death itself. Scholars debate the meaning of this labour. Was Heracles' descent meant to symbolise humanity's defiance of mortality? A mythic reassurance that even death could be overpowered by strength and will? Or was it a cultic story tied to his hero worship, portraying him as someone who literally transcended the boundaries of life and death? Some point to the fact that Heracles was later granted immortality, suggesting this labour foreshadowed his ascension to Olympus. Others see it as pure spectacle, another tale of outrageous strength told to impress listeners around the fire. You watch as the struggle unfolds in the gloom. Heracles' massive arms wrap around Cerberus's writhing heads, each one snapping, drooling and lunging. The serpent tail hisses furiously, wrapping around his leg, but the hero tightens his grip, muscles straining. The growls and roars reverberate across the underworld, shaking the very stone. For once, the silence of death is drowned out by the sheer chaos of a fight that was never supposed to happen here. And yet, the remarkable part is what follows. Heracles wins. He drags Cerberus up toward the light, parading him in front of terrified mortals before eventually returning him to his post. The underworld doesn't collapse, Hades doesn't wage revenge, then Cerberus resumes his duties as if nothing happened. Which leaves scholars puzzled. Why did Hades allow this intrusion? Some argue that Heracles' Labor wasn't about defying Hades, but about proving loyalty to Zeus by showing that even the underworld could acknowledge his might. Others suggest that Hades respected Heracles' bravery, granting him a rare exception. After all, unlike most heroes, Heracles didn't come to steal or cheat. He came, wrestled, and left. The memory of the scene fares, but the impression lingers. Heracles is one of the few mortals, or demigods, who didn't just visit the underworld, but conquered part of it, however briefly. His labour wasn't poetic like Orpheus's, nor prophetic like Aeneas's. It was physical, primal, loud. And maybe that's why it still fascinates. Where Orpheus failed because of doubt, Heracles succeeded through brute force. Two very different answers to the same question: how do you face death? You walk onward, the echoes of the fight fading into silence once again. The underworld returns to its usual hush, but it feels slightly altered now, as though still remembering the day a mortal dared to challenge its boundaries and actually got away with it. The silence that follows Heracles' noisy departure doesn't last. Soon you notice a flickering ahead, torches burning with a strange greenish glow, the kind of fire that looks more spectral than natural. The path splits into 3 directions, and at the crossroads stands a figure wrapped in shadow, flanked by hounds that shimmer in and out of sight. This is Hecate, the goddess of boundaries, crossroads, witchcraft, and things that thrive in the in-between. If Persephone brings rhythm to the underworld and Hades brings order, Hecate brings mystery. She isn't one of the Olympian showboats. In fact, her origin story is slippery. Some traditions say she's a Titaness who somehow kept her power after Zeus overthrew the old order. Others place her among primordial forces like Nyx. Unlike most deities, Zeus didn't strip her domains when he consolidated power. He granted her dominion over earth, sea, and sky, making her one of the few gods with universal reach. Yet she preferred the margins, crossroads at night, graveyards, thresholds where one world brushes against another. Which explains why you're meeting her here, at the literal crossroads of the dead. Here's your quirky fact: in Athens, people left little meals called Hecate's suppers at crossroads, cakes, fish or eggs meant as offerings to the goddess. The poor often swooped in afterward to snatch up the leftovers, which turned these rituals into an ancient version of free dinner if you're fast enough. Even the underworld's witch goddess couldn't keep mortals from treating offerings like a buffet. Scholars debate the true scope of Hecate's role. Was she merely a marginal goddess of magic and ghosts, or was she a central figure in the mysteries of life and death? The Orphic and Eleusinian cults often invoked her in rituals of rebirth, suggesting she was more than a spooky crossroads figure. She was a guide, a torchbearer leading souls between realms. Some argue she was a protector as much as a witch, helping mortals navigate uncertainty. Others see her as dangerous, embodying the unpredictability of liminal spaces. Like the crossroads themselves, she resists one clear interpretation. You stand before her now, and her form wavers, triple-bodied, each head turning toward a different path. Some myths describe her this way: 3 forms watching 3 directions, embodying past, present, and future. The hounds at her side growl softly, though you're not sure if the sound is in your ears or in your chest. She raises a torch and the greenish light splashes across the path, making every shadow deeper. Hecate doesn't speak. She never does in these myths. Instead, she gestures, pointing her torch toward one of the paths, as though offering direction. That was her role for the ancients too, not deciding your fate but illuminating choices. Crossroads are about decision, about transition, about the anxiety of standing between what you were and what you might become. It's fitting that she rules here, where the dead cross over and the living sometimes intrude. Oddly, some later traditions linked her directly to witchcraft in a more practical sense. By the Hellenistic period, magicians often invoked her name in spells, charms, and curses. Archaeologists have uncovered curse tablets that appeal to Hecate for help in binding rivals or influencing love. Was she truly believed to intervene? Or was her name simply shorthand for power drawn from the margins? Scholars argue both sides, but the evidence suggests she was as feared as she was revered. You shift uncomfortably under her gaze, or rather, her gazes. Being studied by three faces at once is disorienting, as though past mistakes, present worries, and future regrets are all staring you down together. The hounds pad closer, sniffing at your presence, spectral muzzles brushing your legs. They don't bite. They're just reminders that no one stands at a crossroads alone. Finally, she lowers her torch, and the paths merge back into one. The gesture feels like dismissal, not unkind, not hostile, just matter of fact. You realise that you weren't here to make a choice. You were here to be reminded that choices exist. In life, in death, in every liminal space where uncertainty hums. Hecate doesn't solve your problems, she just lights the road enough for you to keep walking. As you leave the crossroads, the torchlight fades, and the shadows close in again. But you carry with you the faint smell of smoke, the echo of hounds, and the uneasy awareness that every step you take, here or in life, is a choice made in the dark. The path after Hecate's crossroads feels different, as if you've stepped into a threshold within a threshold. The air is lighter, dreamlike, filled with a faint hum, as though you're walking through the residue of sleeping minds. You realise you've stumbled into the domain of dreams, the strange borderland where the dead whisper to the living and the living sometimes glimpse the dead. The Greeks believed the underworld contained the gates of horn and ivory, through which dreams slipped into the world above. And like everything here, not all gates are created equal. The Gate of Horn was said to release true dreams, visions that carried real meaning or prophecy. The Gate of Ivory, on the other hand, let through false dreams, illusions that misled or confused. The metaphor practically writes itself. Horn is transparent and strong, ivory is opaque and deceptive, which means that even in death the Greeks imagined a sorting system for visions, because heaven forbid you accept a dream without quality control. Historically but done, Homer gives us the most famous reference in the Odyssey, where Penelope, worried about Odysseus' return, wonders whether her hopeful dream came from the Gate of Horn or the Gate of Ivory. The implication is that dreams were never just random nonsense. They had addresses, origins, even gatekeepers. It's a reminder that the Greeks blurred the line between divine message and brain static, treating both as meaningful but not equally trustworthy. Here's your quirky fact. Some later Roman poets played with this imagery in ways that make you wonder if they were trolling. Virgil, in the Aeneid, has Aeneas leave the underworld through the Gate of Ivory, the false gate. Scholars have been arguing about that for centuries. Was Virgil hinting that his entire epic was a beautiful illusion? Or was he just using the Ivory Gate because it sounded prettier in the verse? Entire careers have been built around that one detail. As you walk, you begin to sense the difference yourself. Some dreams shimmer into focus beside you, clear and sharp. You see soldiers raising shields, a storm on the horizon, a woman at a loom, images that feel heavy with meaning, as though they could tip into prophecy at any second. Others are blurry, nonsensical, dissolving into nonsense as you watch. A man with wings for arms chases a fish made of gold only for both to melt into smoke. A child speaks in riddles, then vanishes into laughter. The underworld apparently has no shortage of surreal performance art. Scholars debate whether the Greeks actually believed dreams came from Hades. Some sources link dreams to Nyx and Hypnos, who lived near the underworld but not quite within it. Others insist the gates of horn and ivory were purely poetic inventions. Were they cosmological beliefs, or just metaphors for truth and falsehood? The line is blurry, much like the dreams themselves. What's clear is that dreams mattered enough to warrant diviners, interpreters, and entire manuals dedicated to decoding their messages. You pause by the shimmering outline of the gates themselves. Two arches stand side by side, one gleaming translucent like polished horn, the other gleaming pale and smooth like ivory. They don't open or close in any mechanical way. They ripple, breathing softly like lungs exhaling visions into the mortal world. Shades drift toward them, dissolving as they pass through, their whispers carried upward into sleeping minds. You wonder which dreams you've received in your own life. Were they horn or ivory? Were they guidance you ignored or illusions you clung to? The unsettling thought is that you never really know. You only realise the gate's origin in hindsight, when the dream proves true or proves hollow. That uncertainty is the essence of dreams, equal parts gift and trick. One of the gates ripples more strongly as you linger, and a dream brushes against you. It's fleeting but vivid. a familiar face smiling at you across a table, speaking words you can't quite hear. The warmth of it floods you with longing, then vanishes as quickly as it came. Which gate did it pass through? Horn? Ivory? You'll never know. Eventually you step back, letting the gates breathe without you. Their shimmer fades into the mist as you return to the path. The dreams slip upward toward the world of the living, and you're left with the reminder that even in death, the line between truth and illusion is never fully clear. The shimmer of the dream gates fades behind you, but the air doesn't grow lighter. Instead, it thickens with a metallic tang, sharp and unmistakable, the smell of blood. You realize you've entered a part of the underworld where the shades don't merely drift silently. Here, they stir, restless, drawn to one thing they can no longer produce themselves, life's essence. In Greek imagination, blood was the currency of consciousness for the dead. Offer it, and a shade could briefly remember, speak, and even interact with the living. Deny it, and they remained voiceless wraiths, barely aware of their own existence. This belief appears most famously in Homer's Odyssey, when Odysseus digs a trench, fills it with blood from sacrificed animals, and watches as the shades crowd around like moths to a flame. His mother drinks and remembers him. The prophet Tiresias drinks and delivers his crucial vision. Even Achilles appears, grumbling about how dull death is. Without blood, none of these conversations could happen. For the Greeks, memory and awareness weren't eternal. They were fueled by the stuff of life. Here's your quirky fact. Some necromantic rituals from the ancient Mediterranean didn't stop at animal blood. Archaeologists have uncovered references to mixing honey, milk, and even wine with sacrificial fluids, creating a sort of spirit cocktail. Was it a literal belief that shades had taste buds? Or was it symbolic? Sweetness for memory, bitterness for prophecy. Either way, the recipes read like someone's trying to cater a dinner party for ghosts. Scholars debate whether these rituals were meant to be literal or symbolic. Did the Greeks truly believe their dead relatives needed blood to speak? Or was the act a metaphor for the living pouring out vitality in exchange for memory? Some argue it was practical religion. Families really thought they could feed awareness to the dead. Others see it as poetry turned ritual, an enactment of the idea that memory itself needs nourishment. And then there's the psychological angle. Perhaps sacrificing blood was a way for the living to process grief, to feel they could bridge the impossible gap, even for a moment. You stand at the edge of a trench much like Odysseus's, the ground still wet with dark pools. Shades gather in the gloom, their faces clearer here than in Asphodel, their eyes sharp with hunger. One reaches forward, mouth opening wide, but another pushes it aside. The desperation is unsettling. These aren't quiet wanderers. They're starving for awareness. It reminds you that eternity without identity isn't peaceful. It's unbearable. And yet the ritual offers only a temporary reprieve. Once the blood runs dry, the shades fade again, their memories slipping like water through fingers. That's the cruelty of this system. Even when granted a taste of life, it doesn't last. Imagine remembering who you are for a few minutes only to feel it dissolve again, helpless to stop it. It's less a gift and more a tease. Some Orphic traditions promise their initiates escape from this cycle. Gold tablets buried with the dead sometimes included instructions. Do not drink from Lethe, drink instead from the pool of memory. The idea was that certain souls could bypass forgetfulness altogether, clinging to awareness without needing blood sacrifices. Was this a real hope, a belief in spiritual evolution, or just wishful thinking written in poetic riddles? Scholars continue to argue, pointing to the tablets as evidence of an alternative vision of the afterlife, one where the dead weren't doomed to constant fading. You watch as one shade finally manages to drink from the trench. Its form sharpens, colour flickers faintly in its cheeks, and for a moment it looks almost alive. Its eyes lock on yours, and it whispers something you can't quite catch before fading again, sinking back into the crowd. The desperation of the others only grows, but the blood is gone. The trench lies dark and empty, and the shades scatter in frustration. Silence swallows the air once more. You turn away, unsettled. The ritual makes sense in its own grim logic. Life feeds death, but only temporarily. For the Greeks, this wasn't horror fiction. It was comfort, the idea that with the right rites, you might speak with your dead once more. But to you, standing here, the hunger of the shades feels anything but comforting. It feels like a reminder. The boundary between memory and oblivion is thinner than you'd like to believe. The metallic tang of blood fades as you move along, but its memory lingers, heavy and unsettling. Soon, however, the path takes on a different atmosphere, less desperate, more hushed, as though you've stumbled into a secret meeting still echoing after thousands of years. This is where whispers of mystery cults thread through the underworld, promising something radically different from the grey meadows, the endless punishments, or even the fleeting taste of awareness. For a select few, Persephone and Demeter's mysteries offered the possibility of a gentler afterlife, one not dictated by monotony or torment, but by initiation and knowledge. The most famous of these were the Eleusinian mysteries, celebrated annually near Athens. Participants, anyone from citizens to slaves, men and women alike, were initiated in secret rites that reenacted the myth of Persephone's descent and return. The rituals were so well guarded that even under penalty of death, no one revealed the full details. What we know is tantalizing. A great procession from Athens to Eleusis, torches carried at night, fasting and purification, and finally the revelation of sacred objects within a dark hall. Whatever the initiates saw or heard, it was powerful enough that they left convinced they would experience a kinder fate after death. Here's your quirky fact. One element of the rites may have involved drinking a special potion called kykeon, made from water, barley and mint. Some modern scholars suggest it might have been laced with psychoactive substances, ergot from barley infected with fungus, similar to the compound that produces LSD. Was the promise of a brighter afterlife inspired at least partly by a carefully dosed mystical trip? The evidence is debated, but it adds a trippy new layer to the Eleusinian glow. Scholars fiercely argue over what these mysteries really meant. Were they symbolic, teaching initiates to accept the cycle of life, death, and death, and rebirth as natural and therefore less frightening? Or did participants believe, quite literally, that initiation guaranteed them a special place in the afterlife? Plato himself hints that those initiated into the mysteries learned to dwell with the gods after death, while the uninitiated drifted aimlessly in darkness. But since no written records of the actual rites survive, the debate is endless, part of the mystery's charm, or its curse. You imagine the initiates here in the underworld, following golden paths instead of grey meadows, their shades brighter, their memories clearer. Perhaps Persephone greets them not as subjects but as companions, sharing her double existence as a promise that death is not just loss but renewal. The contrast is startling. Most shades wander in boredom, but these few move with purpose, their eyes lit with an inner flame. It's as though the mysteries carved out an exclusive afterlife travel package, only available to those willing to walk the long road to Eleusis. And then there are the Orphic mysteries, offshoots inspired by the teachings attributed to Orpheus. These initiates carried tiny gold tablets into their graves, inscribed with instructions for navigating the afterlife, which rivers to avoid, which fountains to drink from, which words to speak when confronted by guardians. Some even contain passwords, lines of ritual poetry that mark the soul as initiated. These tablets, discovered in graves across southern Italy and Greece, suggest that Orphics believed they could skip the bland fate of Asphodel entirely and head straight for Elysium, or even the Isles of the Blessed. The scholarly debate surrounding these tablets is deliciously messy. Were they sincere belief systems, or just symbolic comforts placed with the dead by grieving families? Were the instructions meant literally, like cheat codes for eternity, or metaphorically, guiding the soul through philosophical understanding? Either way, the tablets reveal a deep anxiety, that without preparation, eternity was a blur. With them, you might navigate the maze of death more gracefully. You walk through this hushed section of Hades and feel the difference. The atmosphere isn't oppressive or hungry. It's charged with quiet hope, as if secrets whispered thousands of years ago still hum in the stone. You picture the torchlit processions, the chanting, the barley drink passed from hand to hand. You imagine the initiates believing, truly believing, that their journey through Hades would end differently than the countless shades drifting in monotony, whether or not they were right. The hope itself mattered. It gave meaning to rituals, to life, to death. And standing here in the underworld itself, you realize that belief is its own form of magic, the kind that reshapes eternity, at least in the imagination of those who carry it. The air around you shifts again, losing the hushed expectancy of the mystery cults and taking on a sharper edge. It feels almost like stepping into a debate hall, if debate halls came with shadows that lean closer and whispers that never end. This part of the underworld isn't populated by shades or gods so much as by ideas, echoes of philosophers who never agreed on what any of this actually means. The Greeks, brilliant as they were at storytelling, were equally brilliant at arguing about it. And the afterlife? Oh, it was their favourite battlefield. Plato, of course, strides in first, draped in robes of theory. In his dialogues, he paints the afterlife as a place of judgment and sorting, where souls receive punishments or rewards before eventually being reborn. The myth of Era describes a soldier who dies, visits the underworld, and returns to tell of souls choosing their next lives like shoppers at a cosmic market. The message is clear. Philosophy prepares you for death by training the soul to choose wisely. For Plato, Hades isn't just gloom, it's a moral classroom. Here's your quirky fact. Plato himself admitted he wasn't sure if these myths were literally true, but he used them anyway as teaching tools. Imagine assigning homework with a disclaimer, "This might be made up, but the point still stands." Classic Plato. On the other end of the spectrum is Epicurus, who basically rolled his eyes at all of this. For him, death was nothing, literally nothing. When we are, death is not. When death is, we are not. His philosophy was a giant shrug toward Hades. Why fear punishment or boredom when your consciousness simply ceases? Followers of Epicurus often claimed freedom from fear of the underworld as their greatest comfort. Of course, critics accused them of being hedonists, but to them, living without terror of eternity was the truest pleasure. Then you've got the Stoics, straddling a middle path. They acknowledged the existence of divine order, but argued that worrying about the afterlife was pointless. Focus on virtue in the here and now, they said, because eternity, whatever it is, will take care of itself. Imagine being so calm that even the prospect of endless shadow fields doesn't rattle you. And then there's Pythagoras and his crew who really spiced things up with reincarnation. To them, the soul was immortal, cycling through bodies again and again, each life a chance to learn and purify. Some Pythagoreans even avoided eating beans, believing souls could transmigrate into them. Yes, beans. Imagine skipping hummus because you're worried you might be chewing on Uncle Leonidas. Scholars today debate how much ordinary Greeks absorbed these competing visions. Did farmers in Attica really lie awake at night pondering Platonic rebirth cycles? Or did they stick with the simpler stories of Asphodel, Elysium and Tartarus? Archaeological evidence suggests both. Funerary inscriptions sometimes quote philosophers, while others cling stubbornly to older mythic images. It seems Greek society, like ours, contained every spectrum, from hardcore skeptics to mystical believers to pragmatic, "I'll find out when I get there" types. You imagine this part of Hades as a kind of eternal symposium. Plato lecturing about the immortality of the soul, Epicurus sipping watered wine and chuckling "none of this matters," Stoics nodding solemnly, insisting virtue is its own reward. Pythagoreans in the corner, debating whether a chicken might secretly house the soul of a hero. It's both absurd and profound, equal parts TED Talk and tavern brawl. The tension here is fascinating. The myths provided images, rituals and stories, while philosophy provided frameworks to argue whether those images were true. And in a way, both mattered equally. For some, Hades was literal geography, with rivers and dogs and gates. For others, it was a metaphor for human psychology or cosmic justice. The Greeks never fully settled the question, and maybe they didn't want to. The uncertainty kept the conversation alive. As you step through this hall of echoes, you realise something. The debates themselves are the afterlife of ideas. Plato, Epicurus, Pythagoras, they've been dead for centuries, yet their arguments still murmur here, still shaping how people imagine death. The underworld isn't just populated by shades and gods, it's also haunted by theories, each refusing to fade. The echoes of philosophical debates trail off behind you, their voices fading into the hum of eternity. The path ahead feels strangely open, as though the underworld itself is letting you out slowly, nudging you toward reflection rather than spectacle. You've seen kings, queens, monsters, rivers, punishments, mysteries and philosophies. Now you stand in the part of Hades that isn't about myths themselves, but about their legacy. The echoes that shaped how later cultures imagined heaven, hell, and everything in between. The Greek underworld didn't vanish when belief in the Olympians waned. Instead, it lingered, its imagery restored, reshaped, repurposed. The Romans adopted Hades wholesale, renaming him Pluto and giving Tartarus a starring role in their poetry. Virgil's Aeneid became a template for journeys through death, influencing not just Roman imagination but medieval visions too. Cocytus, Styx, and Lethe became household names in Latin literature, carried forward long after people stopped sacrificing coins for Charon. Here's your quirky fact: Dante's Inferno, the medieval blockbuster of afterlife literature, borrows shamelessly from Hades. Dante's circles of hell echo Tartarus's layered punishments. His frozen Cocytus at the pit's centre twists the Greek river of lament into a lake of ice for traitors. Even Virgil himself shows up in Dante's poem as a guide. Imagine being recruited centuries after your death to play tour guide through someone else's afterlife fan fiction. Scholars debate how much of our modern heaven and hell dichotomy owes itself to Hades. Christianity absorbed ideas from Jewish apocalyptic thought, Persian dualism and Greco-Roman traditions. But the imagery of rivers, judges, and punishments lined up neatly with what the Greeks had already sketched out. Did Hades directly evolve into hell, or was it just one influence among many? The jury's still out. Yet the similarities are hard to ignore. Even today, when people picture the underworld, they unconsciously sketch Greek shadows into their mental map. You think back on the sections you've walked through, the Asphodel Meadows, eerily similar to ideas of purgatory or limbo, Elysium and the Isles of the Blessed, precursors to paradise, Tartarus, a prison for the wicked, it looks suspiciously like hellfire, chins and repentant demons. Even the Furies sound familiar, prototypes for avenging angels or devils who hound the guilty. The Greeks didn't just imagine death, they created templates that echoed for millennia, long after temples to Hades crumbled, and yet their underworld remains distinctly their own. Unlike later religions that promised eternal reward or punishment based on morality, the Greeks kept things more ambiguous. Most souls weren't judged good or bad, they were just placed. Heroism earned paradise, hubris earned torment, but the vast majority trudged into Asphodel. It was less about ethics and more about inevitability. Death wasn't a moral ledger. It was an administrative filing cabinet. That pragmatic view feels oddly refreshing after centuries of fiery sermons. You pause near a stone archway. The last threshold before the underworld dissolves into silence. Behind you, you can still feel the layers of myth. The river's whispering, Cerberus's growl, Persephone's quiet grace, Orpheus's song, Heracles' grunts, Hecate's torches, and the endless murmur of the meadows. Ahead, you sense the faint pull of your own world. The two realms never fully separate. That's the unsettling truth. The Greeks knew it, which is why their stories endure. Death isn't something far away. It's woven into life, just waiting behind the next turn. The scholarly debate continues even here. Was Hades meant as a literal place that Greeks truly feared and prepared for? Or was it primarily metaphorical? A set of images to help people wrestle with grief, memory, and fate, perhaps both. Rituals with coins, libations, and offerings suggest belief in a literal geography. Yet philosophy and poetry suggest it was also metaphor for the human condition. That ambiguity is the underworld's genius. It resists being pinned down just like death itself. As you step through the archway, the underworld doesn't vanish. It lingers, stitched into your thoughts. That's how myths work, not as answers, but as companions, following you into the dark, whispering, "You're not the first to wonder, and you won't be the last." The Greeks may have been wrong about rivers of fire and three-headed dogs, or maybe they were right in ways we can't measure. Either way, they left us maps, strange, crooked maps, that still shape how we imagine the unimaginable. So here we are, back from our long, slow journey through the Greek underworld. You've crossed rivers, stared into pits, dodged whip-wielding furies, sat through philosophical debates that could last forever, and even caught a glimpse of paradise shining faintly on the horizon. And you survived. Something most mortals in myth can't say. Not bad for a bedtime field trip. As the echoes fade, you realise the underworld wasn't just about death. It was about how the living tried to make sense of it. Myths gave form to fears, rituals gave comfort to families, and philosophy gave arguments to restless minds. Whether it was Sisyphus's endless boulder, Persephone's pomegranate, or Charon's one-way ferry ride, each story offered a way to point at the unknown and say, "We don't understand this, but here's how it might work." That's really all myths ever are, blueprints for the dark. And though the Greeks lived thousands of years ago, their underworld feels strangely familiar. We still tell stories about what comes after. We still imagine punishments and rewards, gates and guardians, trials and mercies. We still debate whether it's literal, metaphorical, or nothing at all. The names have changed, but the questions haven't. So tonight, as you lie down, maybe let the rivers of the underworld dissolve into the sound of your own breathing. Picture the quiet meadows where most souls drift, the glow of Elysium in the distance, and the comforting hush of Persephone's court. Think of it not as something frightening, but as an old story passed from firelight to page to whisper, all the way into your headphones. And with that, close your eyes. The journey's over. The myths are still here, watching, waiting. Sweet dreams.